Welcome to Rumpled Trenchcoat, a Columbo podcast for all your Columbo needs. I'm Rich Nocella, and I'm here with my sister,
Adrian Nocella.
And this week's episode is Short Fuse from 1971, starring, of course, Peter Falk as Columbo, Roddy McDowall as Roger Stanford, and nobody else matters. It's all Roddy McDowall's show.
It's the Roddy show.
It's his whole episode. I guess we'll introduce the other people as they show up, because
Sure.
This is also the largest Columbo cast of relatively important characters. So we're 19 and a half minutes BC. This is also so far the longest Columbo's made an appearance. The general plot of this episode is that Roddy McDowall is being blackmailed by his uncle to leaving the chemical company that his father created. And his plan is to blow his uncle up with a cigar box.
Right. So he was to kill his uncle with an exploding cigar.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, essentially he wants a cartoon character death for him.
Yeah. To prevent all of that from happening. And I just have to say, you and I have kind of chuckled about this. This episode is a bit of a beast to dissect. Unlike Lady in Waiting, where it was a beautiful, simple plan that, didn't go her way, the murder plot in this one is so complicated and so convoluted that even upon watching it and rewatching it, and actually I watched it 2.5 times, I'm still not exactly sure I understand what's going on.
Yeah, there's still some really important unanswered questions for something that really should be as simple as an exploding cigar box.
How can this be? How can a child's prank, or not a child's prank, but like a jerky prank,
right,
cause this much confusion for me? But it is.
And look, it may not have been a child's prank, but it was absolutely the back of every comic book I read when I was a kid. The exploding cigar, the X-ray glasses.
Definitely back of the magazine practical jokes.
And let's just start right off. So we've got Roddy McDowall playing Roger Stanford in a photographic darkroom. And he has all these photographs and paraphernalia there, but what he's working on is a cigar box. Mm-hmm. And it's pretty clear that he's working on setting a timed fuse to go off in 5 minutes. And we don't know why. And that's okay, because in a lot of episodes, like in Lady in Waiting, it starts with her just stealing a key off her brother's keychain. We don't know why. There's a lot of episodes that start where we don't quite know why.
It sort of unfolds as it goes along. Yeah, I guess that's the cool thing about Columbo, is that what makes it unique is that you do witness the murder, right? So you're sort of along for the ride with the murderer.
That's right.
And so we kind of watch that plot unfold along with him.
Yes, and the only thing is, of course, the murderer knows why he's making a cigar box bomb. But it is true that, we do obviously find out. So it goes from that scene, and they really focus on the clock. It's very important that there's a delayed fuse, that it goes off in 5 minutes. Honestly, why? I mean, I guess we'll get to that, but I mean, he could have rigged it so it just explodes the second the box opens. There's no reason for it to take a delayed approach.
Yeah, that's true. I didn't even think of that.
Yeah.
I didn't even think of that.
So in the next scene, we know he's rigged the cigar box to explode in 5 minutes exactly.
Right.
And the next scene is him driving his little tram so that we as an audience get a sense of scale of how big this chemical company is that his father, we find out, created from scratch.
It's sort of like, I think, DuPont level, just this huge chemical manufacturing company, just well known throughout America.
Yes, because it's clearly it's the Stanford Chemicals.
Right.
I think it's just called Stanford Chemicals, which is written on the tram, I believe. So he does that to go into a meeting, or he's about to have a meeting with somebody important that we find out later is the president of the company and also his uncle.
Yes.
But on the way into the building, just to show us what a little lark of a man he is, he sprays reception pool in the antechamber with silly string.
And like, Honestly, that would I would go insane if someone sprayed me with silly string. We should mention that nobody knew what that was. Like, we all
Right.
kind of get what silly string is now, but if you're just sitting there, like, you know how like silly string is kind of like cold and it's like weirdly
Yes.
wet, but it's not. It's sort of
Yeah.
like that foam and everything. When he's done, he walks through very quietly and sprays that poor one receptionist. She's got her back turned to him,
Yes.
and he sprays her in the back of the neck with silly string. She starts to scream, rightfully so.
Yes.
And everyone's sort of in a commotion. And one of the, I don't know if he's like the office manager or what, but he says, "Oh, what is this? Did you invent this? So
Right.
this is brand new technology.
Yes.
No one knows what silly string is, so you
At
don't know
least
what
it's
you're
office.
getting sprayed with."
Yeah. Yeah, and they must have hired that actress for her neck in particular, because that was the longest neck I'd seen on a non-giraffe human hybrid. So it obviously created a great target for him, and that was part of it, I'm sure, because instead of having a low front like receptionist did, she had a low back
A low
dress.
back.
So it's basically spray silly string here to get maximum screams.
I'm like, what? Like, I'm telling you right now, if my boss's 8-year-old did that to me, I'd be mad. Like, what is he doing? I looked it up because I was so irritated by this in particular. Roddy McDowall, who plays Roger Stanford, is 43 at the time of filming this. So it's not even like, honestly, it's not a prank for anybody. I'm just going to go on the record. I don't like pranks in
Right.
general. So
No,
I
me
definitely would not appreciate those.
Not a big fan, especially one-sided ones, because
Yeah.
none of the receptionists could say, "Hey, that's a good one," and then pull a super soaker out of her desk and spray him in the face. You know this is a one-sided prank. This is somebody
That's true.
who's got a pretty high level of power that knows that he can just basically disrupt an entire room and nobody's going to really be able to do anything about it except, "Oh, that's our Roger,"
Oh, Roger's at it
Junior, I should
again.
say.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's our
Junior's at
Junior.
it again. It's just, he's so obnoxious,
Yes.
Rich. He is so obnoxious.
And then this I guess gets to our first unanswered question.
Sure.
How old is he supposed to be? Because the actual actor is 43, but
Yes.
we know 90210 you have a lot of 27-year-old teenagers. So, there's a lot of shows where people are older playing a younger person. I don't know if this is yet one more thing to file away for later. I'm thinking that he's probably supposed to be in his early 30s, even though he's a 43-year-old.
I think that's fair. Unfortunately, Roddy McDowall looks 43.
Yeah.
He looks great for 43, but he
Yeah.
100% looks like a middle-aged man.
Yeah, he looks like somebody who's definitely and he is too old, regardless whether the character's fictional age or his actual age.
Yes.
He's certainly too old to be pulling silly string out in an office with people. So I guess we'll have to let that go for a bit. Yeah, in an office while he's on a way for a meeting that he's about to get in trouble for.
Yes.
He doesn't know quite how much, but he knows that it's a problem, and he's still silly stringing people, taking photographs of people against their will. He's just going to town over there.
Yeah.
So he makes it through that office to the sub office, which is the office of the president's personal secretary, Valerie Bishop, played by Anne Francis. She is basically like both, I don't want to say mother figure, but certainly she's obviously his girlfriend, but she is definitely taking on the role of every sitcom where you have the sensible woman and the man-child husband.
Yeah, when we first get introduced to her, she's in a panic. So she's very flustered already. Right. And he comes strolling in after spraying a bunch of his subordinates with silly string. Right. He comes strolling into her office. It sort of sounds like she's very flustered. So it sort of sounds like she's a little concerned that, one, he's late to this meeting. Two, she's very flustered with their relationship, which we are clued in right off the bat that they have a personal relationship outside of their work hours.
And it's pretty clear that they shouldn't be having a relationship.
Yeah.
But they do.
Right.
And even more clear that he has taken photographs of her that she's uncomfortable about. And they don't flat out say you took nude pictures of me. Right. But it's pretty clear that that's what they were implying.
Right. So not only does he burst on the scene with silly string, then he bursts into her office with a camera.
Right.
Right. And it opens with a dark room. So we know that he's sort of like, I guess, an amateur photographer. So that
Yes.
kind of explains partially why maybe she would have let him take naked pictures of her.
Right.
But it does, she is saying to him, like, promise me that you didn't develop those pictures. And
Right.
because he's just such a great gentleman, says,
Yeah.
oh, you were underexposed.
Yeah.
I mean, how awful.
Yeah, no, he's playfully tormenting her, which would be okay in a relationship where that's just your thing, where you guys give each other a hard time. But it's pretty clear that
Yeah.
she is legitimately upset. She's legitimately worried. And he is playing the fool, which, she literally says after
Yes.
the meeting.
But you know what's so funny? I think as we're talking to Stuart, I think I realize why I find him so unlikable. I really don't like practical jokes, like you said, the
Right.
one-sided practical jokes.
Yes.
And look, his means of murdering his uncle in this murder plot, right, is through a practical joke, which is an exploding cigar.
Yeah.
He shows up with a prank with the silly string.
Yep.
It's because this is what it is. I don't mind, let's say, a roast, right? Because everyone's in on the joke.
Yeah.
Okay. But I don't like practical jokes because there is an element of cruelty there.
There is.
And he is teasing her. You're right. He's really toying with her in a cruel way. It's not tit for tat. She's not giving it back to him. She's upset.
She's upset. She has something significant to lose.
Yeah.
He is basically a wealthy son of a multi-million-dollar corporation,
Right.
and he acts like it. His level of before there was the phrase privilege. This is extreme privilege.
Right.
He is doing what he wants, when he wants, with who he wants, and literally nobody is in any position to do anything about it.
Right. No repercussions. Right.
None at all. Which is probably part of why he got the way he was, is that he never had a penalty for it. So that whole scene, there's a lot of work going on in this scene, because that not only establishes their relationship, the fact that he has photos that she doesn't want developed, and it also establishes that the uncle and his chauffeur are going away on a trip tonight, that there is no cigar box. So he asks her, or he teases her, basically, into getting a cigar box.
Yes.
And while she turns around to do that, he takes the cigar case out of his uncle's pocket and slips it into his pants.
Yeah, again, this is just so, when you stated the murder plot at the beginning, although complicated compared to other ones, it doesn't really reveal itself to how complicated it is until we start discussing it. It is so challenging to discuss this episode.
It really is a Rube Goldberg, because the murder itself really is as simple as he opens a box, 5 minutes later he dies.
Yeah, you're
That's
right.
the murder.
Yeah.
But the plan keeps going until the last 10 minutes of the episode. We find out more and more and more every single step of the way. So really, I guess in the interest of saving time, what he does is he tries to take every source of cigars that his uncle has, just so that their one and only cigar he can have access to is the death prank box.
Correct. Yes.
So
the worst practical joke, yes.
Yeah, and by the way, dibs on the title Death Prank. If there isn't already a movie, then
make it now.
Yes. So he goes into his uncle's office, which is the whole supposed reason that he was going to show up at that office, is to go into the uncle's office with the chauffeur Quincy, Mr. Quincy. I thought Quincy was his first name. His last name is Quincy. Or is it? Because this is the most complicated episode of Columbo that never had to be. So the uncle is not his true uncle. He married his aunt, and the uncle's name is David Buckner. Yes.
I'm sorry that I interrupted you, but I have to ask you, I don't know why he isn't his true uncle. If his aunt is his father's sister.
Yeah. I guess he would technically be an uncle-in-law, or I
why
guess
would he be? But this is my
uncle.
question. But why wouldn't he be any? I see what you're saying. It's not his father's brother.
Right. It's not.
Oh, that's all it is. Okay, because they do kind of make it seem like he's the step uncle.
Yeah.
But I'm like, she just got married later in life.
All that happened was she got married later. Yeah.
It's
And
still his
by the way,
it would still be his uncle.
it would really still be his uncle. It's
Yeah.
just that we're making it very clear that they despise each other,
Okay.
so that why it's not, someone could be a stepfather, but I don't know. You're right. There's kind of no such thing as a step uncle. And by the way, I did accidentally invent that term. I rewatched the episode. I never said step uncle anywhere. But in my head, because they did make such a big deal out of it,
Yes.
in my head, I actually thought they said step uncle. Never came up.
So this is what we're discussing. So what we're discussing is that D.L. Buckner, which is also just a difficult name already. Those are weird initials.
I just call him David Buckner.
Okay, so David Buckner is his uncle who's married to his aunt, who is Aunt Dory, and she is the sister to Roger's father.
Yes,
so
who created this company. And David and Roger have a bit of an adversarial relationship. They've really never gotten along. No, because he makes a point of saying in the movie, and by the way, because we joked about them in the beginning, but the truth is David Buckner is played by James Gregory, and Doris Buckner is played by Ida Lupino.
Huge actress.
Yes, and of course, James Gregory, I knew from being Luger on Barney Miller.
I didn't know him at all.
Yeah. By the way, what a great actor, because everything just exudes crashing bore, angry at the world, I just want to sign this. I got a meeting at 6. I just want to finish blackmailing you so I can get to this meeting. Just all.
He looks exactly like his character. He looks and sounds like an important man who just wants to smoke cigars. So he actually did a really good job.
I mean, it was just amazing. Really, honestly, good job. So now we're in the office with him, and David Buckner hands Junior a letter. That he says, look, you're going to read this and make a statement. And that's when we find out that David Buckner wants to sell the family company so that he would not only be president, but he would also be on the board of directors. So they're going to sell, probably, if you imagine DuPont being sold to Exxon, basically a large chemical corporation being sold to an even larger entity.
That's true. I would
and they both get sold to Disney, basically.
And so David would get even more powerful. And Roger has inherited shares of his company, but not enough to prevent the sale of the company.
That's right. That's when we find out that his aunt is the one who inherited the major share of the company. Basically, her brother gave her most of the shares, gave Roger some shares, and then the rest regular investors and that type of thing.
Yes.
And so she is not sure if she wants to sell the company or not. David definitely wants the company sold, and he basically is demanding that Roger quit and convince his aunt to sell the company. And the letter is also saying that he wants Roger to say he doesn't want to work there anymore.
Yeah.
That he doesn't want to be a chemist anymore, and that he doesn't want to live in America anymore. Because the end of it was that he's moving to Europe. So basically, I mean, this is like a quadruple extortion right here, out of his birthright.
David is like, I've really had enough of you. So you have to now leave the country. And my man Quincy dug up some dirt on you. So if you don't extradite yourself out of this nation and convince Aunt Dory to sell the shares, I'm going to expose you. And let's talk about the dirt, because Quincy, this is the first time we meet Quincy.
He's the chauffeur who is really, we find out immediately, really a private investigator, ex-cop.
Yes. So he has found all the dirt on Roger, and we can go through the list, but it was that Roger was risking exposing himself to Aunt Dory about doing drugs in college, which could be as long as 25 years ago,
or
maybe
15 minutes ago.
Or like 2.5 years ago. I'm not sure how old Roger is supposed to be, but he did drugs in college. This is the 70s. I'm not sure why this is a problem. That something happened in Acapulco involving a car theft.
Right.
Is that right?
Yes.
And again, I don't know. The guy shows up with a silly string. Who knows? Maybe he just took his aunt's car for all we know. It didn't seem that big a deal.
I'm thinking that they tried to make him seem again like a big fool, and that he may have just on a whim decided to go for a joyride. Like I'm sure it wasn't like
joyriding. Yes.
Yeah, I don't think it was a carjacking. I don't think he pulled somebody out of a car
Right.
and jumped in. You know, I think it was more like,
Not
oh,
just
he's
like that, he didn't.
yeah.
The way Roger dresses this entire episode is just full on Austin Powers, so there's
Well,
no way he's holding up anybody.
It's full on Austin Powers. It's full on Night Gallery. I expected him to call Quincy Portafoy the whole time.
However,
Yes.
what is the only thing on that
The
list
old
that I
series.
think is fairly damaging and would irrevocably break his trust with his aunt is that he did go gambling and forged his aunt's signature, probably to get more funds.
Yeah, that was the implication, that basically he gambled himself out of whatever money he had and forged his aunt's signature either on a check or for a voucher. The fact is, it was forgery, and of all of them, that's the only crime a white man in the 70s is going to be punished for.
Yeah.
Because there's no way anybody, is going to jail for anything else. But when you mess with money, that's what sends you to jail.
That's correct. Yeah.
So Roger, also, with all of this going on, we get a little hint of yet another character, Everett Logan, where Roger says to David, how are you going to get Everett Logan, the vice president, out of the way? And then he chides Quincy for not finding enough evidence, like, oh, is your wiretap not working? How is it that you can't frame an innocent bachelor?
So Everett Logan is this new character that's introduced by name, who we know also now does not want to sell a company.
That's right.
So Roger and Everett are the only ones that we know that definitely don't want to sell a company. David does. Dory's on the fence.
And they just dismiss it. They'd say, "Oh, okay, I'm kind of done blackmailing you. I've got to get to this meeting." And Roger says, "Okay, you know what, guys, you got me. I give up. I'll go ahead and do this."
And he gives up almost instantly, to the point where even David's like, "You're just gonna give up?" Like, they expected a fight.
He expected a
from
bigger
him.
fight.
Yeah.
And of course, that should have clued him in that he wasn't actually giving up. But you know what? He probably believed that Roddy McDowell was flighty enough to just say, you know what? It's not worth it. I'll just do some other thing, because he is wealthy. He doesn't have to do this. And David Buckner is the type of person who really factors money into everything. So he probably figured, well, you know what? The fact that he has these multiple degrees in science and chemistry, so what? So he can live on some island and be a playboy. It's how he's acting,
It's how he's acting. And David did mention that, like, I would be annoyed too. He did mention that he squandered over $500,000 doing research, which, I always do the money equivalent. I can't help myself. So that's like almost $3.5 million today. Yeah. It's a lot of money to really develop what he didn't even invent the silly string. So like, what was he doing with that $3.5 million? David's a serious man. And you know how we know in the world of Columbo that David is serious, aside from everything else?
You're going to talk about his headshot again.
Yes! He's the second businessman, head of industry, who's got a stern, scowling photo of himself on his own desk. It's again another 8.5 by 11 photo size of himself on his desk.
Not him and his wife.
No!
Not the family. Just him with a typical background. Yes. It's glossy, and it's just him. The same, almost the same pose, with the arm across, tilted slightly to the side, and looking very just like in Lady in Waiting. That picture was of him recently. That wasn't like a picture of him in his youth. That was a picture of him probably before they started filming this episode.
There's no other photo on that desk.
Right.
Just like Beth's brother in Lady in Waiting, like Bryce. There's no Swiss Family Vacation to the Alps. It's literally him looking mad, and it's on his desk. So not only are you facing this angry man in person, because the way you described him is beautifully perfect, now you have to look at a picture of him also looking disapprovingly at you.
Yes. And it's on, like I said, it's on its own desk, and it's not facing outward.
No, it's facing him. I don't know who this is for, other than just, I guess, a prop, but it just made me laugh so hard, where I'm like, this is now the second headshot of an important man who's fairly unlikable in the world of Columbo.
And there's going to be another one that we talk about.
Oh, yes, there is.
And this one on the desk was probably only there so that at the end of the episode, when Junior's sitting at the desk, he looks at the picture contemplatively and puts it face down on the desk. And we'll get to that scene. But that's the only reason that picture is there. But it's so funny. It's impossible not to see it now that we're looking for these.
Well, it's like you said with the doorbell. I never listened to it, the rich person's doorbell. And now I can't not hear it. And now I guess I must, when you look for something, you find it. So now I'm on the lookout for self-portraits.
Right.
Okay, so anyway, that's that scene. Roger gives up. He's like, you know what? You guys got me. I'm going to hightail it out of this country. I'm going to convince Aunt Dory to sell her shares or
basically,
to okay the sale.
Yeah.
I'm just going to accept the terms of your blackmail.
Yeah.
Which
basically
once again, you got me. And once again, knowing Columbo, learning life lessons growing up in our household, blackmail doesn't ever work out.
It does not.
No.
It does not, because it will either get you arrested when you try and stop the blackmailer, or it will get you killed if you are the blackmailer, or in this case, you'll die a Bugs Bunny death, a Daffy Duck death, by having a cigar blow up in your face. And you'll have to picture him resetting his bill from the top of his head to the front of his face again and say you're despicable. But
so stupid. I don't know how this episode is so stupid. It's such a good episode, but it's if you know what it is with this episode, Rich? If you casually watch it, it's fantastic.
It's one of my favorites.
It's really good. I adore Roddy McDowall. I'm so happy to see him getting this vehicle. I love him as an actor, and he just seems like a pleasant person in real life.
Yeah.
But watching this episode is great. Talking about this episode is not great. It's so challenging.
It is difficult, but we're doing it. We're getting it. But here's another odd notion of his age, because during this meeting, David complains about how his aunt spoiled him when she took him in as a kid.
Yeah.
But we find out later that his parents died when he was 17. He specifically says 17. So now maybe that's still considered a kid. I know nowadays 27 is considered a kid, but back then 17 was. So I don't know if that's again just how David Buckner is so gruff and it's like, she spoiled you when you were a kid. I mean, how do you spoil? I guess you spoil a 17-year-old by not making them pay for their mistakes. But she didn't know the mistakes because that's what the blackmail was.
That's what the blackmail was.
That he was going to say, hey, here's all the mistakes he made, and I'm going to tell your aunt. Well, either she knew about them and turned the other way, or she didn't know about them and couldn't have spoiled him, unless he was spoiled in other minor, lesser ways.
I don't know. I mean, he did say that he was indulged. He certainly acts like a spoiled brat.
Yes.
But he is rather accomplished, academically at least.
Yes.
I mean, he wears a medallion from like the National Science Society. I don't know what that medallion's from, but it's like a science prize.
It's a key that was from the National Science Fraternity, I believe. Okay. That he wears around his neck.
And he makes it a point to say he got his PhD like extremely young
in
science.
He was 21. He even specified the age. Yeah, I got my PhD in chemistry before I was 21. That's not counting my MBA and my law. I mean, he's apparently a lawyer as well. Yeah. So that's what I mean. Either he did 25 years of college in 10
25 years.
Or he's or he's a 40-year-old man, in which case, who cares that he did drugs in college? It just doesn't make it didn't make sense, and it still doesn't make sense, and that's why my head hurts just talking about a lot of it. Yes. So,
oh my God, let's get out of this office. Yes. So they're out of this office.
So we're out of this office. Finally, we've escaped the office. Yes. He brushing off the meeting so that Valerie doesn't realize what was going on in there. Right. She just knows it was, I got called to the carpet again. Ha ha, silly goofy me. I'm playing the fool. But he also plants the seed of he wants to be taken a little more seriously, despite having entered by spraying everyone with silly string, by saying, we've agreed that people need to stop calling me Junior around here.
Correct.
And that was just a little bit of a throwaway line that does pay off a little bit later on. Yeah. So now we're finally out of the office completely. And he now has this cigar box bomb that he's going to swap out for now the only source of cigars left, which is the cigar case that's now in his uncle's car.
Correct.
And the only reason I mention that, it's important that it was swapped out there, and it's important that the guy taking care of the car, their mechanic, searched it while cleaning it, basically.
Yes.
So it kind of almost the opposite of suitable for framing, where the killer wanted the car searched so that it could be found that there was nothing in the car incriminating.
Right.
In this case, it kind of worked against him, because now the only reason the only way that bomb could have gotten in there is through the cigar box.
Yes.
So a cigar box successfully swapped.
Yes.
Dear God. Now we cut to the nightclub scene. Point is that he meets up with her, and now we finally get to the murder. What happens is we intersperse between Roger and Valerie Bishop in the nightclub, just kind of chatting and just having a little intimate embrace.
They're definitely on a date. They're definitely not on like a first date either. This is a relationship.
Yes, absolutely. No. It's pretty clear that they've already been intimate, and they're just having a nice little time out as a couple. Interspersed with David and Quincy driving the car that's now at night. They're driving to
Pinewild?
Yes, Pinewild. They're driving to Pinewild.
They're driving to Pinewild, and it's set to what happened is, you're right, it's the back and forth between the club scene, which is like very light and fun and like very swinging 70s, and like the 70s music is on. It's like this nondescript, just sort of, this is what the 70s sounded like. Played over. So that music is now played over the scene of Quincy driving David to Pinewild in horrible rain weather. Horrible. It's a stormy night. Dark. I don't know. Just the drive there is treacherous. It looks like Mordor from Lord of the Rings. I don't know why you would have a vacation home there, but that's where they go. And Quincy, and what they're showing is now the music is really playing a very long time over this scene. And it's silent. We don't know the conversation that Quincy and David are having. What we do see is Quincy fumbling around looking for a cigar. He can't find it in any of the usual spots.
That's right. We're seeing that visually while the jazz music is playing, and you see him pass the exploding cigar box back to David in the back seat. And it keeps interspersing back to the club. So the music is diegetic in the club, but it is part of the soundtrack when we cut to those guys. So, again, very clever. This was still a clever episode. It just was so convoluted, the plan. And yes, you see that they're a couple, but they make a point of having Roger look at the go-go dancer in the club.
Valerie Bishop, interesting character. Anne Francis, gorgeous.
Yes.
And she's a kind character. Yes. And she's also a loyal character, and she's also very good at her job. She's competent.
Yes.
So what is she doing dating this clown?
Well, I mean, look, she's all of those things, but she's also a secretary, and the son of an entire chemical corporation mogul is interested in her. And Roddy McDowall is not just rich, but he's also highly intelligent. He's also would get old in 10 seconds, but in the beginning, for him to be so kind of goofy and fun-loving is probably going to be appealing for a little bit. So she had some pretty good reasons to be with him, and then you could see starting to regret some things about the letting him take the photographs and some other things.
Yes.
And it's funny because they're not even establishing an alibi. He's just kind of out with her. I don't know, because was he establishing an alibi? And this is one of those things that never came up because Columbo never once asked him, what were you doing while that was happening?
I don't know when you want to talk about it. What? He is purposely I think Roger purposely takes Valerie out at that moment, not for an alibi, but to make it appear that she's not working late at the office.
Like she said she was.
Like she said she was. So when people are not where they say they are when they're supposed to be at work, most people think affair. Yeah.
Okay, you know what? Then yes. All right.
I think what's revealed in this episode, which is why it's difficult to talk about because it just unfurls, like you said, up until the last 10 minutes of it ending, is that Roger is extraordinarily calculating.
Yes, this should have been the chess episode.
Yeah.
but that doesn't come till much later. But
Yes.
I mean, the fact that he's good at chemistry helps to make a bomb, but they really should have made him a chess
Yeah.
master, thinking
Yes.
27 moves ahead of everybody,
Yeah.
because he thinks so far ahead it's kind of almost impossible. Like
Agreed.
any step of the way, this could have completely unraveled. And while he's there and looking at other people, he then of course checks his watch to remind us, the audience, that 5 minutes after he opened that box in the back of the car, that it will explode. And it did, and the music stops instantly. And so
let's talk
that's
about the 5 minutes here.
Yes.
Because you're right. Okay, I shouldn't gloss over the fact. So the car explodes spectacularly. So
Yeah.
it is like the world's biggest explosion.
Yes.
It's a full-on bomb. You're right. It is a full-on bomb. This is not really an exploding cigar. It's
No,
a
this
bomb.
is basically like one shy, a couple of atoms short of Hiroshima. This is like a
huge
ridiculously
explosion.
big explosion. Yeah.
But you're right. Why did it need to be timed? It
Right.
didn't matter. It's not like he needed to have, he knows that he always lit it one place and then walked into an elevator or something. Like there's no way to set this up. It could have just as easily exploded upon opening, because it was only ever going to be Quincy and David in that car.
That's right. It was only going to be those two. It was only going to be after they had gotten far enough on the trip that it would be reasonable that the car skidded in the bad weather, which he couldn't have controlled.
No.
So we got lucky that it was a terrible stormy night, and the car was alleged to have skidded and hit the gas tank and explode.
Yes.
So why do the 5 minute thing?
I don't know.
5 minutes on that trip. They made a point, because we're going to get to it soon, how the tram to get up that mountain only takes 15 minutes, but that it takes hours by car. And I guess he wanted an excuse to have Quincy with him, but why didn't he take the tram?
I was going to ask you that too, because David is just impossible, maybe is the answer. But or maybe he just likes the ride. Maybe some people just like the quiet time to think in the ride. I don't know. I mean, they didn't allude to that at all. I'm literally making that up.
Yeah.
But
at least it's a reason.
It's a reason, but it's not even a scenic ride. It is I'm not joking when it looks like Mordor from Lord of the Rings. It looks like an evil, desolate rock mountain.
Yeah, like
it is. At one point they talk about how the dip from part of the tram all the way down to the bottom is over 2,000 feet. That's like bigger than the Sears Tower. Yes, it's huge.
It's almost half a mile, or at least a third of a mile.
Yes, absolutely. So it's sort of one of those things where it's like, this is not an easy beauty. It's not like the shoreline, or what's like that historic like Mulholland Drive in California where you have the beautiful Pacific Ocean. I would get that. But this is just a hideous mountain.
I think they wanted it to look like, oh, we got a house in the mountains, but most people think of green mountains. They think of like kind of where we live in upstate New York, or or just they want to think of this beautiful, beautiful mountain range. And instead it's just rock and crags, and it's just
you don't even see the pines.
No.
I know that at some point there's going to be pines. That's where their cabin is, but you don't even see the pines in Pine Wild.
No, because we only see the inside of the house, which I think they reused in another episode, very likely. Sure. I think we should note that Columbo hasn't even shown up yet.
We should definitely note that he hasn't shown up. You weren't joking when this really is the Roddy McDowall show.
Yeah. The car has finally exploded. The murder has finally happened.
Yes.
So we finally, proceeding with the episode, I make a notation, car goes boom, just to remind me that's the part. So that's the end of the murder. Yes. But now is kind of the start of his plan.
That's correct. Yes, that's the best way to put it. End of the murder. Now it's the start of the plan. I thought I knew the plan because I got it. At this point, I don't know why it's getting so convoluted from this point forward.
It didn't have to be. No. It should have just been, hey, he was being blackmailed. We get it. He wants to sell the company. We get it. He wants to kill him before he could sell the company. We've got it. But we don't got it, because now it keeps going like this. So Roger now goes to Mr. Quincy's house, which is on the second floor. It's, I guess, some kind of servants' quarters of the family estate.
Of the Stanford family estate.
That's correct.
Okay.
He goes inside. We don't see the inside. We just hear a bunch of typing, a zippering of a case, and Roddy McDowall leaves with the typewriter in a leather case.
Correct.
Goes to put it in his car. For some reason, he decided to not turn the light off and close the door. Takes the typewriter, puts it in his car, is going back up to close the door, and that's when 19 and a half minutes in, almost to the second, Columbo shows up.
Yes. And Columbo interrupts Roger's second trip to Quincy's apartment where he's shutting off a light and closing a door. It's so strange because it's not like there was no reason for him to do that either, because Roger was carrying one thing, which is a typewriter.
One thing in one hand.
In one hand. He could have, with his free
hand.
Have
easily turned off the light and closed the door.
But then he made his second trip all the way back up the stairs to do so, and that's when Columbo catches him.
Yeah. Catches him practically red-handed.
In another man's apartment.
Yes. Yeah. Or at the very least approaching it, because he is outside the door. So there's that tiny bit of a fig leaf where, and this is what Roger says, is that he says, oh, I was driving to my house, which is like a guest cottage on the property, and I saw that Quincy left the door open. And that's when Columbo says, oh, the chauffeur, just blathering. And so Columbo starts to look at the apartment, turn the light on, see if there was a sign of forced entry. And Roddy McDowell, basically says, hey, you don't have a warrant. What are you doing? What's going on here? What are you doing?
Right. And also, why are you here? Because we don't really know why Columbo's there yet.
We don't know why he's there yet, because we, the audience, knows that there are parts of Quincy and David all over that mountain.
All over Pinewild.
Right. But nobody else is supposed to know that. And we do find out almost immediately now, because now we kind of crash cut to Doris, or Dora Baker in the played by Ida Lupino, is worried because her husband did not show up at Pinewild, and he should have been there hours ago.
Roger, I called the commissioner of police, and he said he'd send over his very best man.
Is that a fact?
Well, my wife, she says I'm second best, but she claims there are 80 fellas tied for first.
It's funny because when that's said, Roddy McDowell Roger does a double take. He's like, really? Like, you're the best man?
Yes.
And little does he know how best of a man Columbo is.
Well, that's just it. And that's why I like this show, too, is because the commissioner knows that Columbo is the best. And it's not like he has to constantly fight the commissioner. He never has to fight the commissioner. Never. He just points to his record, and the commissioner said, of 27 arrests and probably 2 realistic convictions. And the commissioner just always backs him up.
So they're in the living room of, I guess, their mansion, the Buckner mansion. And Aunt Doris is very concerned, very worried. She's flustered. She missed David's phone call.
Right. And that's when we find out that he called from the car.
And she missed his phone call. Now, let's talk some real rich person stuff, because I love this. She missed his phone call because she was busy at a meeting for the opera board.
Yes, the opera board.
She's on the board of the opera. And so that's why that's so fancy, all of those things.
It is wonderful, because they could have gone with ballet, but they took it one step further and made it an opera.
Yeah, she's not at like a museum opening. She's not attending an event. She's on the board of the opera. Yeah. And so she was busy and missed David's phone call. And we know she missed his phone call because these modern times, that's a quote from this episode. And it is. David has a car phone, and he leaves a message on the world's biggest answering machine.
I was going to say that. This is an answering machine that was almost as big as the Whopper in War Games. It was just...
Oh, it's huge. It's like the size of the entire desk.
Yeah.
And so they play David's message, which, again, leans into exactly what you said about him earlier. What a bore. He's just rattling on and on. That message is like a full minute and a half of nothing.
It's a full minute and a half of him complaining of the machine and then saying, oh, I guess I missed you because you were out on your silly meetings.
Yes.
And she kind of was. She was at her silly meeting. But it also shows how little he respected her, that he would actually call. I mean, all right, we can laugh at the fact that she's on an opera board, but it was obviously important to her, and he just dismissed it as one of her silly meetings.
Right. She's obviously like a cultural philanthropist, so maybe it's not so silly. It's not like, she was watching TV.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that she basically is single-handedly responsible for there being opera in that area of LA. Yeah. But, of course, the main thing is Well, I also wanted to say it's funny because this early answering machine apparently starts recording even before the message ends. Because she's like, "Hi, no one's here to answer your call right now. I got one of these machines. Stupid."
Maybe it did though. Maybe, like, all kidding aside, maybe it did. Maybe as soon as
The early
it
ones may
plays, it
have.
starts recording. Yeah.
It may. And you're right. He just goes on
Oh
and
my
on about,
God.
Roger wants to talk to you about something important, but it may not be what you think it is, but it just doesn't stop. And of course, that's the point, because
Yes.
during the call, what catches Roger's attention is that he opens the cigar box during the call.
Right. So now, as an audience, we're privy to the conversation that was silent because between Quincy and David, because this is now the recording in the car of the scene that earlier had music playing over it.
Yes.
So now we're hearing, there's, I'm missing a cigar, the whole thing.
Just a whole setup for basically, I'm about to open this box on tape, and if I keep blathering, because the machine made a point of saying, we'll keep recording until you hang up.
Right.
So, I mean, a machine wouldn't say that normally,
No.
but they wanted the audience to know that there's some real stakes involved, because even the bomb isn't going to necessarily cut off. I mean, it would if the phone's obliterated, but the whole thing
I think
is
you would hear the bomb. And that's what Roger was nervous about, because now he's sweating it out, looking at his watch.
He keeps checking his watch. And that's the only reaction shot we get the whole episode, is Roger looking at his watch and Columbo looking up and then looking back down with an expression on his face like, I think I already got you. So the message is played. Of course, he hangs up before the bomb goes off.
Look, when I'm calling, I tried to get you earlier today, Donovan. Did you get you in one of those silly committee meetings or something? Miss Bishop couldn't get you from the office either. But what I was calling about, I'm on my way up to the cabin now. So I'll see you Sunday afternoon or evening sometime.
And the reason she's so nervous is not just that because they didn't arrive at the place, but she did try to call him back on his car phone, and he didn't answer. So she really strongly suspects something happened on that car ride. It was a terrible night. It is treacherous roads with no guardrail. And honestly, we could pretty much end the scene there, because that's kind of all that was happening, except on the way out the door, when Columbo was alone with Roger, and he starts asking him questions like, he didn't put it in so many words, but he put it almost in so many words, was your uncle having an affair? And,
that's right.
And Roger,
that's right.
Yeah, yeah. And Roger said, well, that's none of my business, and it's none of your business.
Right.
But he didn't he didn't say no.
Yes. Instead of saying yes or no, which is what you should do with a police officer, especially if you're wondering where your uncle is.
Half plant that seed that his uncle may have been having an affair with the secretary. We don't know that yet, because that's part 27B of his plan.
I mean, look at the appendix for his plot. But I will tell you, I have to bring up another funny, just Aunt Dory moment, just how she's like a rich lady, because I actually love this part. I had to write it down. I put hearts next to it in my notes.
Okay. At
one point, they talk about, Columbo and Roger and Aunt Dory are talking about, who would want to even hurt David, right? Why is there even like a target on his back? And Roger is now talking about how, because this is also part of Roger's plan again, but Roger's talking about how recently there's been some harassment from people from the company because they're worried that it's going to get sold and they're going to lose their jobs. And Aunt Dory's like, I mean, we've had some incidents. They've even thrown a stench bomb, which is... I love that she's so fancy. She wouldn't even say stink. Like that word's not in her vocabulary.
I actually wrote that down too. I said we had anonymous phone calls and there was a stench bomb thrown on our lawn.
She is not going to disgrace herself with the word stink. That's for commoners.
It
was a stench bomb. I was at the opera board. Yeah, it was amazing.
That's right. You're right. Someone at the opera board, they don't get thrown stink bombs. No. They get thrown stench bombs.
No one's TPing their house.
No.
It's a 2-ply paper application to their grounds. But yeah, it's just so, I laughed so hard. I'm like, a stench bomb. That's amazing.
Oh, no, that got me too.
So Columbo and Roger have that exchange. Roger does not deny that his uncle was having an affair. That's intentional, that he's not denying that. It's also intentional that, I guess, just to backtrack for a minute, Roger is responsible for the stench bomb. And isn't it implied that, like, Roger, okay, I don't know if we want to bring it up now or later.
That's fine, because I don't even remember when they brought it up later. It was so much later. But the point is that he was responsible for the stench bomb because it was, again, a chemical thing. Yes. But also, we're not sure, because there were no recordings and the uncle never mentioned it. Were there even anonymous phone calls complaining about it?
Because, no, according to Roger, there's the anonymous phone calls.
Right, again, so getting back to Agatha Christie, we're accepting things at face value that it turns out the killer is saying, and there are no other witnesses. It's not like Dory said, oh, yes, we've been getting these calls. Roger said, oh, well, he's been getting calls at the office. He's the only one saying that. Right. Is that true or is that not? This is like The Usual Suspects 20 years before its time.
Yes. And again, just another point of attack that Roger laid out to accomplish this murder. It's so he's got things up,
to give somebody a potential motive other than the one guy who most blatantly serves to gain the most by his death. Right. In the exchange that Columbo has with Roger at the door, this is another just kind of quickly brushed off thing, and another confusing thing about age and timeline is that Columbo asks Roger about his parents, and he said, oh, they died of a freak chemical explosion in the plant when I was 17. Oh, no, when I was in college. I was in college. And then Dory married David. Now, we already know from the earlier conversation, Dory married David when he was 17, because he said, when I was 17, I told her not to marry you.
Right.
So, two things. One, if he was in college at 17, that would kind of go hand in hand with him being able to have a PhD in chemistry before 21, but still hard to do. He would have had to have been one of those kids that entered college at like 15, had been a real prodigy.
I think so. I think he's supposed to be a real prodigy.
I think that's the implication, but usually people who skip years of college say, oh, I entered college early. I mean, did there be some kind of mention? Yes. Again, it was just unaddressed. And equally unaddressed was number 2, did he blow up his parents?
Yes, and this episode is filled with stuff like this, where ultimately it didn't matter that he got his PhD early. It didn't matter that he may have gone to college early or not. And then there's 2 ways to look at it. He did basically nothing but fool around for 20 years after college, or 5 years after college. I don't really know. He had a bright and promising future he's definitely not delivering on. It doesn't matter. No one does anything with it. And also, I took it that he absolutely murdered his parents in an explosion. That's how I took it. That's how it sort of played out, or the way that I interpreted it. Right. But then again, also never visited. Never
mentioned in Columbo. Columbo didn't even react to it except to just ask about his relatives to see if there's anybody else who would benefit from his uncle's death.
I mean, it sounds like Roger planted a stench bomb in his parents' facilities and then they exploded and not fleshed out. This is another thought in there, not fleshed out at all, but curious enough that we both thought perhaps he murdered his parents.
It does make you wonder, because if your parents died in a freak explosion, I could understand how you would then want to study chemistry, how you would want to know all about it, how you would want to do it, or the other way, that you would want nothing to do with that life. Or he always loved it and he killed his parents so that he would inherit the place, and instead it went to his aunt. And that's entirely possible, but it's also 100% speculation that we will never know because they never bothered to mention it.
Yeah, it's literally one line in the episode. That's it.
That's it. That's a far cry from an old-fashioned murder where that murder from years and years ago played a huge role in that episode. This is like, my uncle and his chauffeur just died in a mysterious explosion. Oh, yeah, and my parents died in a mysterious explosion as well. I don't see how those two could possibly be related in any way.
Not
related. Or Columbo be even curious about it. In any other episode, he would have said, oh, I checked into your parents' death, and they did seem to, the coroner never really did know what got, there'd be some kind of line, anything, and it was not.
No, this episode is jam-packed with, I don't want to say filler, because it's not quite filler. It's as if it was written by 15 people and they all had really good ideas.
Yes.
you know.
And they all had like little threads that they said, oh, this will pay off later.
Yeah.
And then somebody else picked up the script and just did their bit and said, we'll make this pay off later.
Yes.
And nothing ever pays off at all for the most part.
No. And so after that conversation, I believe now we're back in the living room with Dory.
We're back in the living
again.
room now, covered with lilies and flowers, because it's been confirmed that he's dead. This is clearly after the funeral. So we don't know how many days passed. We're assuming enough to have had a funeral. And Dory's in there with Everett Logan.
Logan, who is the other board member who has shares in the company. He's vice president, and he's aligned himself with Roger in trying to prevent the sale of the company.
Yes, he also wants to keep it in the family. He's somebody who would have been satisfied just to continue to work for the company. He likes the Stanford family. You get the idea that he is just a good, honest vice president, someone that she literally, and again, a little on the nose, but she says, I'm glad I have someone I can trust.
Yeah, she does say that to him.
Yeah.
So Everett Logan is played by
William Wyndham.
William
who is,
Wyndham.
Of course, Doc in Murder, She Wrote.
Yeah, he goes on to play Seth in Murder, She Wrote. I really like him, and it was nice to see him the second time in Columbo in the early season. And he has the best fake rich person's name I've ever heard. It's Everett Logan, which is just, they could be like 2 first names or 2 last names, either or. Yep. They're both family names somehow. Yes. It just means that he was born with like a monocle, a pocket watch, a 3-piece suit. Like, it's a fantastic rich person's powerful man's name, Everett Logan.
Everett Logan. They might as well have named him chairman of the board.
Yeah. Chairman of the board.
Yeah. I mean, that
makes it Irish. Yeah, it's fantastic. It's a great name. So yes, Dory and Everett are sort of talking about David's death.
It's honestly just kind of a little heartfelt scene that just establishes 2 things. One, she really is kind of disappointed in Roger's life path, that she really expected more for him, that she wanted him to be the president. And 2, boy, I really trust you, Mr. Everett Logan. And that's the whole scene.
Well, you know what's interesting, too, is the next scene, and I'm going to say like the next 45 scenes are now Columbo heavy. So he was pretty light as a character in this episode thus far.
Right.
And his presence in the rest of this episode, very strange for a Columbo episode. Yes. It's almost exclusively filler. Columbo's presence in this episode really doesn't move the plot along. No. We're not along for the ride with Columbo where he's figuring out
things.
He's not discovering anything. So there's now like a bunch of scenes with Columbo just like looking at the crime scene, taking a tram, being scared of heights, all like little Columboisms, but really not even really worth mentioning. I don't think much of this.
Almost not. I would only say it's worth mentioning that the tram, he's clearly terrified.
Yes.
And the sergeant from the sheriff's department is apparently completely oblivious that he's terrified because Columbo is literally shaking in fear and he's saying, hey, take a look at this 2,000-foot drop. Yeah. So he's basically the tour guide for the audience telling us, hey, this tram, although it's safe, could potentially be really dangerous. And you're right. Honestly, no other reason to mention it. He doesn't even say a word during the whole tram ride or afterwards. He just looks like he was shell-shocked after the fact.
And I think it was supposed to be comedic, but it didn't play as funny as Columbo usually plays
either. No, it does play into Columbo having a huge fault that he then immediately overcomes within the episode. Mm-hmm. Like he's terrified of heights in this one, and then he's not. And then and then in other episodes he gets seasick really, really easily, and then he doesn't. So it's
scared of dogs, then he's not.
So it really is. It's like everybody gets that one chance to make a fool out of Columbo, and then he, but that's the only chance he got because now he's going to overcome it. And in this case, it wasn't even the killer; it was just the sergeant from the sheriff's office. And you're right; the whole scenes are just the sergeant doing all the talking to tell Columbo what he found, and Columbo saying, yeah, the car could have blown up when it hit when the gas tank exploded if it hit a rock, or maybe the bomb was inside the car. And the sheriff immediately says, yeah. So clearly they both think there was a bomb in the car for no reason immediately, just like onto him right away with no real reason. I mean, it was a wet night. They had skid marks. They had parts of the car on the bottom of the cliff and just all over the place. They made a point of saying the chauffeur's cap was found intact, but 20 feet away. I mean, just all the strange details that ultimately didn't mean anything because
Again.
it was also instantly explained by, well, what if the gas tank blew up? All of that evidence really
Yes.
amounted to nothing. I guess
Nothing.
the only thing that was important was that it was scattered, because that's when he can do the twist at the end, and that's the only reason why that's important. But
Right.
we're not there yet.
No. I guess after that, Columbo is now in the dark room
Yes.
back at Stanford Chemical.
Yes.
And another little silly comical scene where like Columbo's sort of looking into the dark room, and then you hear like a bunch of commotion. He comes walking out of the dark room. He sprayed himself with silly string in his face.
Yes.
But again, if you found an unknown aerosol container, why would you spray it in your face?
You wouldn't, and that's a very un-Columbo thing.
It's very un-Columbo.
Unless, and this is the only fig leaf I'm going to give them, is he saw it. He saw the label, he knew it was silly string, and purposely did that to make himself look even more foolish in the eyes of Roddy McDowall. Okay. That's a bit of a stretch only because we know Columbo, but that's the only thing. I don't think he's going to just randomly spray something in his face with all these chemicals.
I actually took issue with it because Columbo's bumbling routine is very highly crafted.
Yes.
So Columbo's not an actual idiot. So this makes him look like an actual idiot.
It does. It does make him look like an actual idiot and a potentially dangerous idiot. And we also don't know, because they didn't say, oh, I've got a warrant, or gee, I hope you didn't mind. No. He just shows up in the guy's dark room.
In his private office.
In his private office. So it's in his office within his office, and he never once says, I hope you don't mind, the receptionist let me in. I mean, there's just nothing, no explanation. He just walks out with silly string on his face that Roddy McDowall then plucks off of him in amazingly horrendous continuity.
After taking photographs of him.
Yes, again.
So Roddy McDowall now also, I guess they just hint at why he would have a dark room. Right. But he's got his camera, and he's taking a bunch of, he always has his camera on him. So he takes a bunch of candidates of people in humiliating positions because he's a jerk. Yes. So he takes pictures of the lieutenant of the police department with silly string all over his face. Then helps him pick it off. And then Columbo lets him. It's just this whole thing's so weird. This exchange is very odd.
It is very, very odd. And that's when we find out about all the degrees he had, and that key means that he's, obviously extremely intelligent. Again, did we need to know all that? We already know he's a chemist. Just being a chemist is kind of enough. I mean, I guess we want to really drive home how brilliant he is.
I don't mean to be a jerk. He didn't need to be all that brilliant. So if he committed this crime without putting all of these sub plans into achieving this crime, all he had to do was build a bomb. That's really not that difficult. I mean, I'm not saying anything here or there to getting incarcerated, but it's not that difficult to do. It's not that hard to make a bomb.
As you said, at one point there are 30 other PhDs at this place and tons of other people who are capable of making a bomb when you work around nothing but explosive chemicals all day.
Yeah, because they did make a point to list the contents of the darkroom chemicals, and it's like every poison. It's like the weapons board of Clue. It's like every poison, it's like everything that could kill you, he has in his darkroom. And I'm like, I think it should really just be silver nitrate. I don't know why you have all of this in your darkroom. It should
pretty much be fixative. There's no reason to have nitroglycerin in your darkroom.
No.
And then in an episode full of baffling things, they're having a conversation. They step outside, and now suddenly they're on the 12th floor of an outdoor factory. Does that mean that his office is on the 12th floor?
No. All I could say is, if we're having this hard of a time, we need to look up who the editors are of this episode, because they made something somewhat coherent out of this episode. Because again, watching it, beautiful episode.
Sure.
Trying to talk about it, surprisingly challenging.
Sounds insane, because again, here they are suddenly, there's something I wanted to ask you, and all of a sudden, like I said, they're outside on the 12th floor. By the way, Columbo, not afraid of heights already.
All of a sudden, it was like this. It's like taller than a water tower. Like, I don't even know what that was.
No, I don't know. It looked like it was some kind of chemical equipment that was so huge that it has to be outdoors. And I didn't count the stairs because the way they were walking, it was impossible to count. But it had to be 12 stories. It just had to be at least 8. I mean, it was a high building.
I think it was very, very, very high up to the point where it's like, don't you need like protective gear? Like, I don't know.
Well, yeah, because Columbo was going to light a cigar, and he said, hey, don't do that unless you want to blow up right now. But neither of them had hard hats. Neither of them had any kind of protection at all. It was just, I'm just walking out of the office. This is my daily thing. Here's a guy who takes a little golf cart to go from one place to the other, but he's going to walk up 12 stories to, like, there's no elevator on that. I mean, it's just this insane.
I don't know. You're right. It was completely baffling. It was utterly baffling because the way it was cut, are we to expect that he now is like an evil overlord? So he has like his office on the top of a chemical mountain. Like, what is happening? Or he just cut like, here's a tour of this giant piece of, I don't know what this is, a chamber of nitroglycerin or oxygen. It was like a gas tank, but it was, like you said, 12 stories high.
Immense. It was just immense. There's no way he's going to have his office on top of that. So this was the old, we have access to a chemical plant, so we're gonna it's a really cool shot. But you have to ignore that the last time we saw Columbo, he was practically soiling himself on a tram because of the height, and now he's just walking down out in the open. These 12. It would be enough if it was an enclosed building and you had to walk down that many flights. It's just all out there, all exposed with a potentially explosive thing right there. And the entire point of that scene was to just ask, hey, is there such a thing as a bomb that's untraceable? And that was the entire point of that walking down the stairs scene.
That was it.
And to then segue to, I know enough about cigars that this is my area of expertise, even though I only smoke cheap ones 99% of the time, and I don't know enough that I need to be told not to light one next to this.
Yeah, again, it's like whoever wrote for Columbo. I feel like they forgot Columbo was in this episode, and it was just, again, we're writing for Roddy McDowall. We're very happy to have him guest star or something, because his character really wasn't true to who Columbo is. He's not actually stupid enough to light a cigar next to a towering inferno of gas, compressed gas.
It does. It does. Well, like you said, it makes him look like an actual idiot instead of I'm going to pretend to be an idiot so that to undermine your opinion of me so that I can fool you better. It's, oh no, I guess he's just a bumbling idiot. And that is very much not Columbo. And yes, I do take that personally.
Yes, me too.
Columbo says, I know cigars, and boom, they're now right back into the office, Mr. Buckner's secretary's office, Valerie, to ask about the cigars. And again, I just think in the interest of saving time, we can just collapse it to say that's where we find out that Logan is missing a box of cigars.
That's all you need to know.
That's really all it was. And that we're basically, Everett Logan is upset that a cigar box is missing. He's wondering if he's being suspected.
Which is ultimately part of Roger's plan, is to frame the vice president, Everett Logan.
Right, but not for murder. It's to make it look like anybody could have gotten into Logan's office to steal a cigar box from there to kill him, any one of the disgruntled people. And it's clear that Logan doesn't want to sell. Yes. So maybe not, but the point is he's missing a cigar box that he can't account for, and it's made clear that anybody could have gotten in and taken it.
Okay.
So now we're back on golf carts. Columbo is on the golf cart with Roger. That's when Columbo pulls out the note that we heard Roger type at the very beginning, because it was thrown in the garbage can of Quincy's servant's house. So we heard the typing. He came out with the typewriter. That was all the way in the beginning of the episode. Now Columbo pulls it out saying, it looks like Logan was trying to get you upset about the sale of the company. Because that wasn't even all the evidence against Logan. That was just one thing that all of a sudden you realize, is he now trying to throw something on Logan here? First the cigar box, now a little suspicious note that Columbo won't let him see, which is fine. And that's when we are told by the killer that Quincy had an ID on him called, was it Harry O'Neill?
It's Harry O'Neill.
It was Harry O'Neill.
So he just sort of casually discusses how the murder victim's right-hand man is an imposter.
As an alias.
is posing as somebody else, as an alias, which is Harry J. O'Neill.
the question, of course, we have for each other is he really living an alias? Because the first few times I saw this, I thought, well, maybe he was just lying. But when we get to that scene, which we're coming to relatively soon, we can talk about it. I'm almost leaning toward he really did have an alias in another apartment. But
I have no idea, Rich.
Yeah.
I don't know. Tell me what to
thing we
think
don't
on this.
So we're actually almost there anyway. So
because I just want to say again, this is the problem with this episode. Ultimately, is Columbo's not discovering much of anything. A lot of what we learn is told to us simultaneously as it's told to Columbo by Roger.
Right. So we don't know, again, back to Agatha Christie, where the murderer is giving us information, and even though we know they're a murderer, we still are taking it at face value.
It's almost like an unreliable narrator.
Yes. You know? Yes. I mean, I guess literally, yes.
Yeah.
So after that meeting, Roger gets off the cart, hops into his car. Valerie comes running out in the parking lot and saying that she was upset because that was the only other important scene in the office with her and Columbo, is that under the mildest of questioning, she completely folded and lied, because what happened was Dora tried to call Valerie when she thought that her husband was missing. This was before she found out she was dead, and she wasn't there at the office like she was supposed to be.
Right. So now thinks that Valerie Bishop is working late, and she wasn't.
Right. So right off the bat, suspicious. Yep. Now we know as an audience that she was with Roger.
At the club.
But she panics and says she went to a movie because she still doesn't want anyone to know about Roger.
Right. She doesn't want them knowing that they're dating.
That's right. Which you think would probably come to an end once a dead body's involved. You'd probably say, oh, you know what? I was with him. And you'd think that he would want to say, well, I was with her, just so that they could both give each other alibis, which wouldn't matter because it was a time bomb. So I guess the alibi itself doesn't really matter. But the point is that she's nervous. She's starting to crack a bit.
Right, because no one asked her to lie to the police. It's not like Roger asked her to lie to the police.
Nobody did. Again, there wasn't that scene where, you know how there's scenes in other episodes where it's like, oh, by the way, if the police should happen to ask, you were with me that night, you know, or whatever. Well, why would I say that? Well, it just would simplify things. You know, there wasn't that scene. No. She just did it. She just lied for really nothing. Very, very little reason. Very little reason. And I understand she wants to keep that relationship under wraps, but very little reason to lie. And she did. And he, of course, reassures her by rolling up the window on her while she's talking and driving away.
Because this is yet now another part of Roger's plan, is that he's now dating Valerie Bishop, not because he necessarily wants to, but because she will be used as a tool to help execute his big master plan.
Yes. So he drives off after closing the window on Valerie,
who is now
literally in her face. Like if she didn't move her hands, they would have gotten stuck and she would have been along for the ride. He drives off after basically not caring how Valerie, this is how sure of himself he is. Mm-hmm. He doesn't care because he's set her up enough that even if she tells the truth, it's just going to look bad for her. He's not even like other murderers where he's trying to be careful that his accomplice is doing their job because she didn't even know she was an accomplice. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't matter because even if she says, oh, you know what, I lied about that, I was really out with Roger, they're either not going to believe her or know that she lied to the police. I mean, it doesn't matter. She's now already screwed herself by lying for no real reason.
She messed herself up, and she's no longer of use to him in this plan.
Yes.
So she's served, as far as Roger is concerned with how he's really sociopathic, I guess, is that she served her purpose.
Yes. Yeah.
So now he can systematically file her away and literally roll up a window in her face.
Yes.
To dismiss her.
Because in that scene, we find out that she let him look at private files of Mr. Logan. Yes. So basically, he used her for her position to get access to these places. Mm-hmm. He used her to have an affair, to take pictures, as we find out later, very soon. We're going to find out why. Yeah. And you're right. He's done using her now. And so now it's like, okay, bye. Love you. Keep in touch.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, great. Yeah. Kisses.
So he shoots off. He enters the house that we believe is O'Neill, which is Quincy's alias and his secret base of operations.
So so needlessly complicated. Okay,
It
yes.
really is, because he could have just planted all this evidence at Quincy's place in the first place. It didn't have to have a second whole place. And to be fair, Columbo is the one that mentioned that Quincy had a second place. It was only Roger that mentioned the name O'Neill.
I'm so confused by all this. Quincy didn't even have to have an alias.
He didn't. This
at
was completely unnecessary.
Yeah.
We already knew that he wasn't really a chauffeur, that he was a private investigator, ex-cop.
I mean, he was clearly again, look at his job. Do people like this really exist? He's like an attaché. What's that character in James Bond? Because that's really who he is.
Yeah, well, he's Odd Job.
Odd Job, thank you. That's yeah. He's essentially, he's like.
Or Smithers.
Yeah, he's like a personal assistant, bodyguard, spy, detective, but he still literally is chauffeuring the man around. Like he is actually driving him places. It's just, and then they give him a double identity, so an alias.
An alias on top of that. So
with two residences. Yeah.
So if Quincy was leading that double life, then why did he need the alias of O'Neill?
Unless he really is O'Neill and he's going by Quincy at the company, which still makes no sense.
It still makes no sense, except that Columbo knew that Quincy was an ex-cop, so the name Quincy has to be his real name. And so the whole thing is this O'Neill real? Is it not? Who cares? Doesn't even matter, because the entire point was for Roger to bring incriminating evidence that he faked for not only Logan, but more importantly for Buckner, his uncle.
Yeah, for David.
And this is where the photos finally come into play. So now, like 45, 50 minutes after we hear that he took compromising pictures of the secretary, Miss Bishop, we soon find that that's part of the evidence that he purposely gets caught leaving. He waits around. At least this was clever, because he entered when it was daytime, and it's now nighttime when the police show up, because it took them that long to track down this place for O'Neill. And they clearly eventually figured it out and tracked it down.
So let's sum up. Let's just, again, just for my own peace of mind, let's sum up the scene. Roger goes to a house. We don't know whose house it is yet. Right. He walks in and he puts down a typewriter. He's essentially planting evidence or whatever. And we see the picture on Quincy's desk, and it is Quincy and his wife. So we know that this is now the second home of Quincy / O'Neill.
Under the name of Art Riley, right.
And then Roger very intentionally leaves the residence when the police officers are approaching, because they just now discovered the second home to O'Neill. And Roger intentionally gets caught by the police officers.
He literally drops a lamp on purpose so they could say, hey, there's somebody in there. And and then there's a whole chase scene where he clearly is just trying to get caught. He tries to make it look good, but try to get caught. And they go instantly back to Miss Buckner's living room, where Roger and the cops are there. Columbo comes in the room. Roger is very upset. He is trying to talk to Columbo in private, and normally Columbo would jump at the chance, but he is essentially blowing him off as another sergeant comes in with some evidence. The evidence is what Roger had on him that he wanted to be caught with, just to make it look like he was trying to keep it from his aunt. And that evidence is basically 1971 equivalent of photoshopping, using, he's a photographer. They did make a point of it the entire episode that he's a photographer, where he superimposed pictures of David Buckner with nude pictures of his secretary, which would have been his personal secretary, Miss Bishop. And of course, because they all kept the affair a secret, there would have been no reason for those nude pictures to exist as far as Roger was concerned. This whole thing was done as part of Section 71B, subheader
This is when it gets real crazy now.
It gets real crazy because he wanted that evidence to be discovered. He could have just left it in the O'Neill's place, the fake O'Neill's or real O'Neill's place, or whatever the hell O'Neill's place it was. He could have just left it there for the police to find.
But let's talk about what he really did here. No one suspected an affair. What he's trying to let Dory know that her husband was having an affair with Miss Bishop. He wasn't. But the way we discovered is not because Dory was suspicious, because there's nothing to be suspicious of. It's because Quincy now supposedly turned on his own boss
Right.
and was surveilling his own boss for blackmailing him.
Yes.
So again, none of this needed to occur. They're already dead. Why
Yes.
is any of this happening? Why are we
Exactly.
doing this? So this whole plot turn here is that Roger intentionally got caught. So it looked like he was breaking in to steal evidence to protect his aunt from finding out about an affair, while he intentionally wanted everybody to know about an affair that didn't happen, where Quincy was supposedly blackmailing David about this affair. That's ridiculous.
It is ridiculous. And the only possible reason is made slightly clear because, by the way, part of Roger's plan was not only all of this, but that somehow the sergeant with police evidence would be careless enough to let Dory rip it out of his hands to say, could you hear off camera, hey, that's police evidence. But what? You're going to let her just pull it out of your hands?
A civilian. You're not going to let her take it out of your hands.
No, you're not going to let it take it out of your hands. Roger maybe knew she was the kind of entitled woman who would try to get it out of his hands because she already destroyed some evidence against Logan earlier. But, but still, because she found that was the other part of the frame.
That's
is that Roger.
Tell us about it, please.
Roger put fake reports from Quincy about Logan, not about an affair, not about a murder, but about things like selling patents to the competition,
corporate espionage,
work-related corporate espionage, so that basically he would get fired. So this was all so that Logan would get fired as vice president. David's dead. Roger makes himself look better because that was now the excuse for why David always hated Roger, was Roger said, I knew about the affair and didn't want to tell you. Oh, that's why David always spoke so badly of you. Not just because you're a complete loser who's squandering your brilliance and your birthright. It's because you caught him in an affair. So that was part of that. So that now he could finally step up the way she wanted him to anyway. And then it made Logan look untrustworthy. He clearly had a high level of trust with her. Yeah. So he took out the vice president with false data found by Quincy, who's dead and can't say anything about it. He took out the president, his uncle, with a cigar bomb, so he can't do anything about it. They can't sell the company because she was wavering anyway, and knowing all of this, she's going to want to keep the company and let him be in charge. So all of these dominoes have finally fell. Oh, and by the way, the one person who kind of also knows too much, Valerie Bishop, also gets fired because Dory thought that Valerie was having an affair with her husband, so she gets fired.
Right. So he takes out everybody. But let me rewrite this episode for everybody. Ready? Yes. I'm just going to rewrite it. Yep. Okay. Entitled nephew wants to take over the company, so he kills uncle and frames the vice president. That's it. That's all you had to do. That's all you had to do. Because if you frame the vice president goes to jail, he could take over the company. This is double-crossing aliases that are implied. This is wooing a secretary. Talk about a long game. Wooing a secretary to provide a potential affair that never really even existed. I mean, this is so crazy and convoluted. Again, this is not Lady in Waiting murder plot.
It's not the way you do a murder plot, especially on the heels of Lady in Waiting, which was basically, I shoot my brother because I thought he was a burglar, and that's the whole plan.
That was her murder plot. I like that. We talked about that, but I like that plan because it was so clean. This could have been clean, but they just made it. There were so many branches to this tree that again, I'm still unsure why Quincy had an alias at all.
I don't know, and I don't even know if he really did. That's another question that's kind of left out there, because did Roger plant that photo earlier, scoping out the place that we didn't see, and then put the typewriter there this time around when the police had a reason to try and find the place? We don't know. It's not mentioned. It doesn't matter. He's at the bottom of a gorge in multiple pieces. There's just none of this matters, and yet they did it anyway. And so at this point, Dory gets so upset about the evidence that, of course, somehow a police sergeant lets her rip it out of his hand, that she then finds the evidence that he was pretending he didn't want her to find, and that is that her husband was having an affair. And that set up everything that we just summarized. But she gets so angry when Columbo won't destroy this evidence too that she kicks everybody out of their house, which somehow negates the fact that Roger was escaping arrest, breaking and entering, interfering with the police investigating, stealing evidence, because they don't take him with them. I mean,
No,
yeah, obviously,
it's
when
like-
she said,
it's
"Get out
like-
of here," that should have been like, "Okay, well, you're
And
coming
you
with
come
me,
with
sir."
us. Because it was like all of a sudden justifiable. It's like, oh, look at this sweetheart kid who's 43 looking out for his aunt who raised him. Like it's
From a
literally
17-year-old.
makes no sense. Yeah.
So now we're basically heading back to the office the next day.
And Roger comes strutting in. Now the entire episode, he's dressed like my Holly Hobbie doll from like
Yes.
1977.
Yes.
He has on like these prairie prints, these like blouses. He's wearing necklaces, and now he comes dressed into the office like Jane Fonda in 9 to 5, like a pantsuit, and he's like very serious. He looks very corporate.
Because, and I'd have to look in 70s fashion, but he has that canary yellow shirt with the wide collar.
Yeah.
And then a dark suit. And I'm not sure if it's navy, which is a really nice look, or if it's black. But the point is, he is now, for the first time this episode, you're right, dressed like someone professional. He walks in, bumps into a guy on the way in, and looks very stern. The guy says, "Oh, hi, Junior," and he just freezes him out completely and says,
Mr. Stanford.
And then he just goes on his way. All the receptionists that just within the same week and a half, or however long this episode takes, because we don't even have a sense of time on this episode,
I think
that
it's
he
endless.
that he just sprayed with
Silly string.
it's purgatory, so it is endless time. That he just sprayed with silly string. All of a sudden they're saying good morning. He doesn't even say good morning back. So he went from even just being the goofball to not even being a nice executive. Nice executives say, "Good morning, Doris," or whatever, whoever they're talking.
At least you could be curt and courteous.
Yes, you can say good morning.
Morning. That's it. But no, he just ignored everybody. He walked into his, which brings us full circle because he sits down, looks reflectively at the photo of his uncle on his desk,
the
headshot, and then he's like, "Ooh," and he puts it face down.
And that reminds me, because we didn't actually talk about the second headshot, so I don't want to leave that. I don't want to leave listeners in the lurch. The second headshot is basically the same exact headshot, but with the bluish background. And that's what his aunt and Roger look at holding hands. This was going back to even before we knew he was dead. They were just missing, and Roger was holding his aunt's hand, saying, "I'm sure he'll be fine," knowing he was dead. So again, very
knowing he was blown to
sociopathic.
blown to smithereens, not like he's just fine or maybe he's injured. It's like I know he's exploded and I did it.
Yeah.
But that second headshot is found in the family home. On like their coffee table or their like credenza or something. And it's hilarious because it's like, so now this guy has two stern
Identical
photos.
headshots.
Neither one of them are smiling. No. He's just as angry in both. Still no personal photos around the room. So it's like, I wouldn't want to look at like a husband lovingly when he looks like that. I'd be like, oh, am I in trouble? Why are you looking at me like that?
It is just so funny. Yes, he writes the photo down in his desk. We're back in his office now because either out of guilt or I'm thinking probably more like, well, that chapter is over. Let me put the photo down in the desk. I'm done looking at this stern picture of you.
Yeah.
And Columbo and Logan enter the office, and that's where we find out that Logan was fired and that Aunt Dory won't even answer his calls. Aunt Dory won't even answer his call.
She fired him because she now believes that Logan has been sort of a traitor to the company.
He was fired for that. We find out that Valerie was fired. I guess in an earlier scene, we find out Valerie was fired. And basically he says, "Oh, that's some mistake. You weren't fired. My aunt just thought you'd rather live 3,000 miles away," or what. He
ships her off to Arizona.
Yes,
with Valerie's mother. So he's like, now you get to be a spinster in Arizona with your mother.
That's right. In case you had any thoughts, I'm making it very clear to you, we're done.
Yeah.
We're done. Because he says the old, "Oh, no, we'll see each other a lot. No, really. We'll see each other all the time." With you being in Arizona and me being in LA. It's just completely. So that was the house cleaning that he did. He cleaned everybody out. So he's at the desk. We find out Logan was fired as well. And Columbo gets a phone call with some new evidence. Roddy McDowell is finessed into going with Columbo and Logan to the crime scene where this new evidence is. and the sheriff hands him in a big sack some evidence that we don't know what it is yet.
Right.
Columbo says, we need to get this up to your aunt right away, who is now no longer in her living room, but now she's on the cabin up at Pinewold that we never actually see wild. Again, it's confirmed it would take hours to drive or 15 minutes by tram. So they all hop on the tram. First, a whole bunch of people come off the tram, so I guess that's also a touristy area. It's not like they're the only house up there, but while they're in the tram, Columbo pulls out the evidence, and it is a charred and burned, but intact and unopened cigar box. Now, of course, the implication is that is the bomb.
Yes.
Because Columbo says to Logan, hey, I was wrong about all of this. This is great news for Aunt Dora that her husband wasn't murdered. It's sad that he's dead, but at least she'll have the peace of mind that he wasn't murdered. And in the meantime, Roddy McDowell is starting to sweat because he's like, oh, that's a bomb that you've got there.
So Roger is now thinking, holy moly, I went through all of this planning and they really did die in a car accident where their gas tank exploded because my bomb didn't go off.
That's right.
I mean, that's what he's thinking.
And so Columbo and Logan have a whole conversation that is basically meaningless. It's just saying, well, that really, I'm so happy to see that. I'm glad that's, again, a tragic accident, but that's all it ever was. I still don't know why I was fired. I really need to ask Dora about that when we get to the top of the tram. So there's still going to be some splaining to do, but it's not going to be, as bad as, I blew him up with the cigar box. So, of course, Columbo opens the cigar box, but there's, a funny scenes where Roddy McDowell is trying to retape it, as he pulls the tape off the box because he doesn't want the box open because it's a 15-minute tram ride, but 5 minutes until that explodes once open.
Yes.
Of course, Columbo opens the box. Of course, Roddy McDowell starts to panic. Columbo continues to blather, and Roddy McDowell basically says, would you please shut up? Every time.
Well, see, now there you go. You're looking at your watch again. Would you do me a favor? Would you please keep quiet?
And Columbo, the more Roddy McDowell gets panicked, the calmer Columbo gets. Really, this scene is really the only Columbo moment, I think, in the entire episode.
It's it. And then Logan's clued in. What Columbo's really doing is finally he's discovering something that Roger didn't tell him.
Yes.
And so he's sort of detailing like, oh yeah, this was crazy, and all this stuff happened and whatever, and that's why Aunt Dory is angry with you because of this evidence that we found. I know why you were fired. Right. And so it says none of those things. I didn't do any of those things. None of those things happened. And now you see you see recognition across Logan's face, Everett Logan's face, where he's like, oh, I thought you were my ally in not selling this company, and now you set me up to get fired, and you have a lot to gain, Roger.
That's right. Now with me gone and your uncle dead, and you own a black suit with canary yellow shirt, it's over for me. So of course it's wonderful. This is purely just now acting at this part because Roddy McDowell is now as frantic as Columbo was earlier. He's looking out windows. He's looking for escape. He's looking and seeing it's a 2,000-foot drop and we already joked about the severity of the explosion. There's no way anybody's surviving that. And if they somehow did, they wouldn't survive the fall because the gondola wouldn't have survived it. The whole thing would have come crashing down. So he opens the door and says, we've got to get rid of that cigar box. And Columbo intentionally dumps it on, it didn't look too intentional, but it was clearly intentional that he went to hand it to him and that it all spilled out onto the floor. So Roddy McDowell ends the episode literally on his hands and knees, scrambling through the cigars. And instead of just throwing them all out one by one, it's like he's trying to dig for the one that's the explosive one. Again, I guess he was panicking, but not the smart way to do it. The smart way is to just throw every single one out. And while he's doing that, and so I don't know, I think Logan knew a little earlier because Logan just says, my God, when he sees him scrambling on the ground, as if he knew in advance what Columbo was trying to show.
Oh, I didn't take it like that. Okay, got it.
I mean, maybe. I honestly, yet another thing that's like, well, was it or was it not? It ends with Roddy McDowell realizing that he's been had and he starts to just laugh hysterically because he knows that he was outsmarted by this guy who apparently is a genuine idiot from the way he acted earlier in the episode.
For someone that sprayed himself with an unknown can of a substance in his own face.
That's right. And so, in a nice touch, he takes his National Scientist Fraternity key off and puts it around Columbo's neck.
Yes.
One of many murderers that acknowledges that Columbo was actually, in the end, smarter than him after all.
It's great.
And it just ends with him laughing on the tram. And so, all of that being said, a wonderful episode to watch. I still love it because of all the great acting involved. But boy, that was just something to just when you really break down that plan, just crazy.
It's so unnecessarily complicated. And like you said, watching it before we had this podcast, I've seen this episode a bunch of times and I'm like, oh, this is a great episode. It's one of my favorites. I love Roddy McDowall. And then trying to talk about it and I'm like, what happened? Why is there like a 12-point plan for something real simple?
It's an exploding cigar.
It's an exploding cigar.
It should have begun and ended there. Maybe, like you said, frame the vice president. Even if you wanted to frame the vice president for espionage so he gets fired, not necessarily for murder, get them out of the way. And that's it. That's the whole thing. It didn't need all of this other stuff. It just
double identities for Quincy. I mean, it's just, that's what really got me. I was on board. I was like, okay, this is a little bit more complicated than I anticipated. But once we got to Quincy having an alias of O'Neill and whether that was really true or not, I was like, you know what? I'm gonna check out a little bit.
Yeah. It was just too much. So I guess in the interest of the rest of the podcast, this is the part where we can decide, well, when do we think Columbo knew?
I kind of knew it right from the start. It was nothing definite. It was a lot of little things. Little things.
And this is tough because Columbo kind of knew right away, but he kind of didn't know anything up until the end. It was just really strange. The only thing is because for me, if I was going first here, I'd just say that it was suspicious that he was at the chauffeur's door, but I don't think that it did anything except bring Columbo's attention to him. And it was only when he kept checking his watch while listening to his uncle talk, and with Columbo apparently already suspecting a bomb before there was even a car accident. I don't know.
I'm sorry, he's suspecting a bomb before there was even a body discovered.
That's right. So, I mean, I would have to say then, because if not then when? There was never that aha moment. There was never that, going back to Murder by the Book, where he said, if it was me, I would have flown. There was just never that moment where even the killer has to say, ooh, I should have done that differently. That was a mistake I made, and this guy's onto me. There was never that moment. All it was, I just noticed you checking your watch a lot. And then Columbo smugly walks out the door, and it's like, but so what? He's checking his watch. That's not, that wasn't a gotcha.
I think he knew by then. I'm going to just, again, agree with you, just to close this out. I completely agree with you. I think checking the watch is when Columbo knew, and then everything else was just, letting Roddy McDowall dig his own grave. But I do think that that's when he knew, when Roddy McDowall was trying. That's when he was really, really looking at Roger. So I'm going to go with the watch. Yep.
Yeah, it's the only reaction shot Columbo had the whole episode. Correct. Now's the point where we judge the murderer on the sympathy meter. So on a scale of Ruth Gordon to Dick Van Dyke, Ruth Gordon being the most sympathetic, Dick Van Dyke being the most vicious, where would we place Roddy McDowall in this episode?
I'm beginning to be very fond of you, Lieutenant. I think you're a very kind man.
Don't count on that.
I am a little torn, as I often end with the sympathy meter here, because on the one hand, he was being blackmailed or extorted, I guess technically, out of his late parents' dynasty, out of his job, out of his career, and out of the country.
I mean, what desperate people do desperate things, and you were just creating a powder keg situation.
Yeah, I mean,
did
honestly,
you see what I did there?
Yes. I actually didn't, but that's very that was very good. I mean, David might as well have just painted a target on his chest and back and head, because you're threatening severely somebody whose parents died in a mysterious explosion. So
I mean, you're just basically turning Roger into Job.
Yes.
So, like, how do you think it's going to go? It's like
That's
every
right.
part of his life would be gone.
That's right.
So it's not going to go well.
Right. And so for that, obviously, he gets a lot of sympathy.
Yes.
I think there's a lot of people who are otherwise honest who might be driven out of desperation to murder in that situation. I can't fault him horribly for that. However, the fact that it is this long, involved plan, and for that alone, I hate his character.
I was going to say the same thing. I swear the exact same thing.
Just for torturing us.
Yes.
You know, I'm going to put him at the 50% mark, and the only reason he isn't higher is the high level of sympathy of his situation and the fact that he didn't kill Mrs. Bishop. The fact that he just wanted her to go to Arizona out of state, to me, gave him some points because he could have killed her. You know, other episodes, she would have been killed because she knew too much.
I will say this. I'm going to, I had it at 60% towards Dick Van Dyke.
Okay.
For all those same reasons. I think he was put into he was like a caged animal.
Yes.
So he had to do something drastic. He really only killed the two people personally responsible for putting him into that situation. Like, his uncle's no prince. He could have convinced his own wife to sell the company and had nothing to do with Roger. So he could have had one conversation with his wife where he didn't say her opera board was silly. Right. And maybe he'd be nice enough to convince her to sell the company, and then it would have literally nothing to do with Roger or Logan's shares. Period. So the victim is not sympathetic. Quincy is collateral damage. That's what he was hired to do. And so that's why I put him at 60%. He didn't frame Logan for murder. He didn't kill Miss Bishop.
Right.
And he just strengthened his relationship with his aunt. So although it was cruel to make her think that her husband was having an affair, other than that, he really was, I think, going to take good care of his aunt and have a nice little company and really claim his birthright, which is to run the company. He is a genius. He should have been at the helm. And this guy marries his aunt and is taking everything away from him. And gonna kick him out of the country. So I give him 60%. I don't give him more than that for literally the exact same reason that you said, because this hurt my brain to talk about. So that's why he doesn't get more. And also, his personality is very unlikable.
Yes.
So although I'm sympathetic to the position he's in, he himself is fairly intolerable to be around.
Well, look, I mean, next time, just pretend that you thought he was an intruder and throw an exploding cigar at him.
It's real easy. Again, I summed it up for you, gentlemen. This is how you write this episode.
So I guess now we come to, will it hold up in court?
Tell me, Doctor, how do you catch a man like that?
You don't?
You're probably right.
I know that I tend to often, if not always, say that Columbo is going to win.
Right.
But it's going to be really hard for him to explain in court why he was scrambling on his hands and knees to pick up what he believed obviously was an exploding cigar that he had no reason to believe was anything but a normal box. Correct. So I'm going to say yes on this one.
This one, I'm going to agree with you. I'm going to say yes, with the caveat that they can somehow establish that his uncle was actually murdered and it wasn't just a gas tank explosion. I think you could probably get Roger on attempted murder or a murder plot. I don't know how those charges work.
Maybe conspiracy to commit murder.
Yeah, exactly. But I don't know if they would get him on like murder one premeditated, only because I don't know if they could really definitively plan that this wasn't an accident.
Yeah, that's true, because the whole point of the bomb was that it was untraceable.
Mm-hmm.
So unless we get pulled into Columbo court, I think we'll just go ahead and say that it'll stand up in court. But I wouldn't be surprised if we get a summons.
Yes.
And so I think at this point, there's nothing more to say except thank you for listening. I hope this.
Thing.
Oh, yes.
Believe it or not, I have more to add to this episode. No, I wanted to talk about the murder weapon because it's just so hilarious to me, the exploding cigar. So I'm going to talk about the history of the exploding cigar in this country. Okay. That's what I'm going to do right now. So the exploding cigar is intended to be a prank and not a tool of murder. Right. Okay. It's intended to be a practical joke. It's fairly self-explanatory. You light it. There is a chemical reaction. It explodes in your face. Okay, a legal scholar of the early 1900s, and I'm going to quote it because it's hilarious. I got this from Wikipedia, is that the utility of the exploding cigar is so low and the risk of injury so high as to warrant a conclusion that the cigar should not have been marketed at all. So this was stated officially by William Mitchell in the Law Review, who's also the biggest stick in the mud I've ever heard. Like, I don't know why you have to make a declarative statement about why a exploding cigar is stupid. It's a prank. It's supposed to be stupid.
Yeah.
But I'm bringing this up. Itching powder. What good
Yeah.
is it?
Right.
But like, it's just so funny to me because it is intended to be a prank. But of course, the original exploding cigars, which date back to the early 1900s, did actually have a chemical reaction. So of course there was huge injuries, right? But it became so popular that people started making homemade ones with real dynamite. So as a result of people losing fingers, having their jaws blown off, as a result of this, at some point in this country, several states actually banned the sale of exploding cigars. They were sort of remarketed and rebranded with now a mechanical element, that when that mechanical element inside the cigar gets heated up, that causes the end of the cigar to burst.
Right. Okay.
So that was like the safer version of it. But there are a couple of very famous examples of the exploding cigar. This one is maybe an urban legend. It's a prank that Ulysses S. Grant, our president of the United States, I can't believe I'm having this conversation, he gave to the president of a college of Chicago. He gave him as a gift a cigar, but it was an exploding cigar. So the college, it was meant to be a prank. So the college president, his name is Horace Norton, another great name. He was so happy to receive this gift from the president of the United States that he didn't smoke it. He revered this cigar. So he put it in a display case in the college's museum. And it remained there for decades. And so when the museum was closing, college alumni thought, what would be a beautiful ceremonial thing? Let's let Horace's grandson smoke the cigar. So it is rumored and widely reported that Horace Norton's grandson, while giving a speech at the museum ceremony, smoked the cigar. 2 puffs in, it exploded in his face, which is the best delayed prank I've ever heard. I mean, talk about the long game. It's fantastic. That is the history of the exploding cigar. And that was my one thing.
I gotta say, I love that. That is great.
So I just thought, like, again, I don't want to be too down on this episode because that's not how I feel. I love this episode. It was just a hard one to talk about, and that's why I'm very happy to sort of say goodbye to you. We could talk about the next episode.
One more thing.
Oh, yes.
Yes. There is a good reason, as it turns out, why this became such a hard episode to talk about. And that is Columbo was so successful and unexpectedly so for the first season that Universal asked Levinson and Link to do one more episode for season 1.
So it was like one more thing for Levinson and Link.
They came up with Exploding Cigar. Now, they had already filmed Blueprint for Murder, which is the episode we're going to talk about next time. This one was filmed after the fact, but shown first. Okay. I don't know if it's because of Roddy McDowall's celebrity or if they just wanted to wrap up the first season with Blueprint for Murder. But this was the last filmed episode of season 1. And it makes sense because with all the other episodes, they obviously plotted everything out well in advance. You didn't have all of these questions where there's questions that Columbo has. These are questions that the audience has that are never answered. And it makes sense because this was obviously rushed. And it sadly is one of Peter Falk's least favorite episodes of the first season. But again, that makes sense because, as you said, Peter Falk's appearance was basically just to have some of the character tell him about stuff he found. Yeah. And his only real Columbo moment was in that tram at the end when he was, just saying, "Oh, what are you so upset? Oh, there you go, looking at your watch again." It's just all these wonderful Columbo moments that finally show up at the very, very last end of the movie. So that's why this was so hard to get through. Normally, Now, I don't know why, if they had to rush it, they then came up with this super convoluted plan. You'd think they would have gone an easier route for themselves. And that's why I'm kind of almost wondering, was this even half written as another show or an idea that they had that they then wrapped up and kind of shoehorned Columbo into it and made it a Columbo
reads
episode?
like that. What you're saying makes so much sense because it reads like an episode that was thrown together for this series. And I do almost wonder if this was a plot for another movie somebody had, and they're like, hey, exactly as you said, let's somehow fit this into the Columbo world.
Because this feels a lot more like their TV movies, Guilty Conscience, that were very Columbo-like but didn't have Columbo because there weren't episodes of Columbo. And this, to me, felt like one. Because it would make sense in a TV movie for the plot to be revealed slowly, bit by bit by bit, up until the very end. Whereas in Columbo, typically we know why, we know how, we see it happen, and then it's a matter of, how'd they make a mistake? How did Columbo figure it out? And there was really very little of that in this episode.
It's not the Columbo formula.
Right.
It's not.
Right.
It's not. Oh, this makes a lot of sense, Rich.
I think I'll just say thank you, everyone, for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. We had fun doing it here, but we appreciate that this one is probably as hard to listen to as it was to talk about. But it was still a great episode. We of course love Columbo. So thanks again for listening, and please join us next time when we talk about Blueprint for Murder. You can follow us on Twitter at RumpledT, on Instagram at Rumpled Trenchcoat. On Patreon at Richard Nocella is creating Rumpled Trenchcoat, a Columbo podcast. And until next time, remember, 1 if by land, 2 if by Rumpled Trenchcoat.
I mean, again, you need to talk to me before you hit the record button. That's what's going to happen from now on. That's just...
I figured if they weren't going to try, I wasn't going to. Thanks, everybody. See you next time.
Thank you. Take care.